I have this book.
Oh, I didn't even know that book existed.
Yes, you did. I told you about
I
it.
know.
And I read it, and I have notes in there, and I have highlighted parts for you.
Okay.
So I'm glad you didn't get it yet because I have things to show you. But I am very excited because the book, the Parkinson's Plan, A New Path to Prevention and Treatment. You're gonna actually, I think this is a great read for everybody. I was even telling my mom and some of my friends, I'm like, this is for not just people with Parkinson's. I think this is for everybody. Welcome to The Secret Life of Parkinson's, a podcast created by people living with Parkinson's to help break the stigma of a disease no one likes to talk about. Now, here are your hosts, Jessica Krauser and Brian Baker. But I'm so excited because we have Dr. Ray Dorsey here with us. And we have to call him Ray. So, hello, Ray. How are you?
I'm doing really well. It's a pleasure to be with you and Brian. Thanks very much for having me, Jessica.
Oh my gosh. Thank you so much for joining us. I think I'm so excited to share this information, this knowledge, and hopefully this book with people in our community. We have a great following on our podcast, and everyone's always, searching for information. And this is like a wealth of knowledge, but it's the knowledge that I think we've all been waiting for because everybody wants to question, how did I get it? Why did I get it? I'm so healthy. I exercise, I eat right, I do this, and I did all the right things. How did I get this? And not that this totally tells us specifically per person, but it definitely heads it in the right direction. So why don't you real quick just give us a quick background about yourself and how you got into writing the the Parkinson's plan with Dr. Michael Okun.
So I'm a neurologist. I'm a Parkinson's specialist. Recently moved to New York to join a newer organization called Atria Health and Research Institute, which is focused on preventing diseases. And then Michael and I decided to write this book because, as you and many of your listeners know, Parkinson's is one of the world's fastest growing brain diseases. Quadruple number of people in 2021 as were just 30 years ago in 1990. And I think that's the report card on Michael and me. And I think, as we indicated in the introduction, we're failing the Parkinson's community. This disease is affecting more and more people. 250 Americans will be diagnosed with the condition today. 100 will die from it. And we really haven't adequately addressed it. And so Michael and I wrote this book, and we outlined a plan, PLAN, to actually prevent the disease, learn why it begins, amplify the voices of you and Steve and Brian who are affected, and then to navigate the new frontier of treatments. And that's why we wrote the book. And as you indicated, we wrote it not just for people with the disease, but for people who care about Parkinson's disease and people who care about not getting Parkinson's disease. Mm-hmm. There's 1.2 million Americans with Parkinson's, and there's 330 million Americans without it. And we give you a plan if you're one of those 330 million about how you can reduce your risk from ever getting this terrible disease.
And this is your second book, though, correct?
Yeah, so the first book was written with Michael Bosbloom, outstanding Parkinson's specialist in the Netherlands, Todd Scher, a longtime leader of the Michael J. Fox Foundation and neuroscientist. And we wrote that book in 2020 called Ending Parkinson's Disease. That book came out at the height of the COVID-19 pandemic, so there was no media attention, podcasts or anything to help spread the word. But in that book, we argued that Parkinson's disease was largely a man-made disease, fueled by chemicals in our food, water, and air. And in this book, we really double down on that contention, tell lots of stories of people who are affected by these chemicals, and provide you 60 pages of references to support the contentions that we make.
So go ahead. Were you going to say something?
My understanding is that if we all live long enough, we would all get Parkinson's.
Yeah, that's just wrong. Parkinson's disease is not a natural consequence of aging. It is an unnatural consequence of aging. If you put a mouse in the lab and let it age, it does not spontaneously develop Parkinson's disease. It will only develop Parkinson's disease under one of two circumstances. One, you alter its genes, or two, you expose it to toxic chemicals.
So sorry, real quick. So to that point, because what we learned, or at least what we read and what we talked to a doctor about before, is everybody loses 10% of their dopamine at a certain age, and you lose so much of that every decade of your life. is that, is losing
So,
dopamine not, I don't know. Is
so I
that
don't, I don't know if people losing 10%. I mean, nerve cells die off, and
okay?
and they did die off in almost every part of the
Mm-hmm.
brain. But that doesn't lead, in and of itself, does not lead to Parkinson's. Now,
Interesting.
aging, if you are exposed to chemicals, let's just say smoking. If you smoke cigarettes in your 20s and you die in your 30s, you're not going to develop lung cancer because it takes years for the disease to become manifest. And the same thing for Parkinson's, by and large, that you have often early exposures and only later manifest the disease. But Parkinson's is not a natural consequence of aging. We had lots of old people, and you look at our presidents. George Washington lived into his 60s until doctors bled him to death. John Adams lived to age 90, writing letters to Thomas Jefferson, age 83. Benjamin Franklin made it into his 80s. All these individuals for whom we have pretty good medical records, none of them had
Oh.
Parkinson's disease, as far as we can tell.
Hmm.
And when Dr. Parkinson's describing it in 1817, he says, I'm describing something that's not been classified in the medical literature. He thinks he's describing something largely new or something that was extraordinarily rare. And he described 6 people with the condition in 1817. 200 years later, the Global Burden of Disease study estimates that 6 million people have the disease. So how do you go from something that's not classified in the medical literature, affecting 6 individuals in London, to something that's affecting 6 million people 200 years later and is the world's fastest growing brain disease? It's not aging, right? There were lots of old people before today. It can't be genetics because genetics don't change that much over 200 years. It has to be factors in our environment. And we detail the chemicals in our food, water, and air that are likely fueling the rise of this disease. I'll give you more examples of man-made. This is simple man-made disease. Car accidents, right? Before Henry Ford developed the car, there were no car accidents. I mean, there were horse and buggy accidents, but no car accidents.
Mm-hmm.
Another one was an easy one, lung cancer. So in 1900 in the United States, lung cancer deaths almost did not exist. There were almost no lung cancer deaths in the United States. So rare was lung cancer that when doctors encountered it, they considered it a once in a lifetime oddity. And the doctors and students would gather around thinking they would never see another case. Unfortunately, they were wrong because 25 years after cigarettes were introduced in the US in early 1900s, you see a corresponding rise in lung cancer deaths. Smoking in the United States peaks in the 1970s. 25 years after smoking peaks, you see a corresponding decline in lung cancer. And there are lots of them, like mesothelioma from asbestos. Largely just didn't happen, extraordinarily rare until we created asbestos. And the list goes on and on. Even you guys are young enough that, obesity and type 2 diabetes were really rare when we were kids.
Yeah.
And it's really common. Is this because of some change in our genetics? Is this some natural consequence? No. These are due to changes in our environment, ultra processed food, fast food, soda, soft drinks, and the like are all fueling the rise of diseases. So we should get really, really comfortable that every society creates its own diseases. And one of the diseases that our society has largely created, and industrialized societies in general, is Parkinson's disease. If we change our environment, if we address these chemicals in our food, water, and air, we get rid of Parkinson's disease. We create a world where future generations do not bear the burden of this disease.
Mm-hmm.
We outline a very detailed plan so that by 2035, the rise in Parkinson's disease stops, and that by 2036, when you have me come back on The Secret Life of Parkinson's, we start talking about the fall of Parkinson's disease. And this isn't far-fetched. This is already happening in Europe. It looks like the prevalence of Parkinson's disease is flattening in many countries in Europe. And in some countries, Germany and the Netherlands, the number of new cases of Parkinson's adjusted for age appears to be falling. And if you look back to decisions that those countries made decades earlier, they got rid of paraquat, they got rid of DDT and other organochlorine pesticides. They got rid of trichloroethylene. They cleaned up their air. So all the toxins that we talk about in chapters 1 to 4 of the book, they address, and now they're seeing the benefits, early signs, needs to be confirmed, early signs that the number of new cases is falling. And we've done this before. Lead levels today in children are 95% lower than when we were kids. And we've gotten rid of leaded gasoline and leaded paint, and our kids are smarter for it. If we get rid of some of these pesticides, if we get rid of these dry cleaning chemicals, if we get rid of air pollution, our kids will live in a world where Parkinson's is extraordinarily rare instead of extraordinarily common.
And not just that, but it'll help those, or at least the thought is that it'll help those that already have Parkinson's. Because what I was explaining to Brian, and I think it was in the book as well, but when you were talking to Ali Signorelli on the Instagram interview that you guys did, she asked the same question. And I think you mentioned something, again, related to lung cancer. And you're like, well, if you go to your doctor and they say you have lung cancer, what's the first thing he says? Stop smoking. So what's the first thing that, if a farmer came in or somebody, came in and was diagnosed with Parkinson's, what's the first thing the doctor says? Usually they say, you have Parkinson's, here's your medication, see you later. Instead of, okay, you have to stop this. But there's no way, I don't want to say there's no way for us to stop it, but if these are cut out, it will hopefully then maybe improve our symptoms or slow them down. But what are just thinking big picture, what I know we would like to say, we can get rid of, if we get rid of all these toxins, but what is the actual possibility of that happening? To me, it seems like, how can we not just go to these companies that make this chemical, and say okay, let's start at the very beginning, make a different something else that's not going to have this reaction. Why is that so difficult?
So lots there. So one, we've gotten rid of chemicals in the past. We got rid of lead in gasoline. We got lead in paint. The world didn't spin off its axis. Knocking in engines didn't become such a big problem. We were able to do it. We got rid of CFCs and our ozone layer is repaired. We got rid of DDT and no one's bemoaning the loss of DDT and certain other organochlorine pesticides. So we have time and time again gotten rid of chemicals in our environment and yielded enormous health benefits and enormous environmental benefits from doing so. And we can do exactly the same thing for these chemicals. Why are we finding it socially acceptable to be spraying pesticides on kids' playgrounds and schoolyards? Why are we finding it socially acceptable to use likely carcinogens? According to the Environmental Protection Agency, the most commonly used dry cleaning chemical is a likely carcinogen. That means it likely causes cancer, and we continue to use it. Why do we find it socially acceptable that over half of Superfund sites in the United States are contaminated with trichloroethylene, and many of them haven't been cleaned up? And this chemical is known to cause cancer, according to the Environmental Protection Agency, by all routes of exposure. Yet we have not cleaned up all of it, and we've only recently decided to ban it. And that ban is not going to be put into place for 10 years. If we want to get rid of Parkinson's, if we want to get rid of Alzheimer's disease, if we want to slow the rise of autism, if we want to address ALS, if we want to get rid of brain cancer, we can do all of these things. We just need to summon the will to change our environment and get rid of unhealthy chemicals in our environment that are causing disease and suffering and death for millions and millions of Americans.
So is it are we just not telling our story loud? And I know that's part of your plan, is amplify the voices, but it's so my career is in marketing. And so it's a big goal of mine I feel overall, have we not figured out the right message? In everything you market, you need a message to really hit home. It's did we not hit the right message or the right audience or something to say, this is what Parkinson's is really like, and you don't want it? Is that the case? I don't know.
I think yes. So there's a secret here, and the secret is that Parkinson's is preventable. Parkinson's disease, for the vast majority of people, is preventable. We know from the Parkinson's Foundation, a great study called PD Generation, that's many people have participated. Over 10,000 people have participated, in many in the United States. They looked at the results from the first 8,000 people who were offered free genetic counseling and free genetic testing. This is all led by the Parkinson's Foundation. And of the first 8,000 individuals that they identified, 12.5% carry a genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. Said another way, 87% of Americans, the vast majority of Americans with Parkinson's disease, have no known genetic cause or risk factor for the disease. The principal cause of Parkinson's lies not within us, it lies outside of us in our environment. If we read the work of Dr. Caroline Tanner, if we read the Parkinson's plan, if you look at the research, like Michael and I have spent the last 8 years doing, you come to the conclusion that Parkinson's is largely a preventable disease due to chemicals like pesticides, dry cleaning chemicals, certain dry cleaning chemicals, and air pollution that are fueling the rise of the disease. And we can live in a world without it. We can live in a world where the disease has a more slowly progressive course to it. One evidence of that is that air pollution among people who already have Parkinson's, air pollution is associated with an increased rate of hospitalization of the disease. So in those studies, they were looking at hospitalization as a proxy for a faster rate of progression. We know that people have variable rate of progression. So the Parkinson's plan applies not just for the 330 million Americans without the disease, but also for the 1.2 million Americans who want to have the slow progression as possible for the disease, and we give you 25 recommendations for doing so.
I try to approach everything from a common sense thought process a lot of times. And listening to you, I'm like, okay, the first thing that pops into my mind is the chemicals that they were exposed to back in the 1800s when this disease came to light and what we're exposed to now are completely different. But yet people have continued since that time to get Parkinson's. So, I mean, they didn't have a lot of the toxins back then, but people were still getting it.
Yeah, so outstanding. So in 1817, there were no synthetic pesticides. There was no trichloroethylene, although it's been around for 100 years. There was no perchloroethylene. There was no dry cleaning. So what was Dr. Parkinson describing? Well, he was describing air pollution. So levels of air pollution in 1800 London are equivalent to what's in Delhi, India, and Beijing, China today. It's equivalent to what New York City, just outside my window, experienced 2 or 3 years ago when the skies over the Big Apple turned orange. So the level of air pollution that caused New York City skies to turn orange is what was experiencing in London in 1800. You couldn't even see across the street. Sometimes it looked like night, even though it was day, because the air pollution was so bad. And there was just a study today in Science that came out from Dr. Ted Dawson and his group colleagues at Johns Hopkins showing that air pollution might be contributing to dementia with Lewy bodies and might be contributing to Parkinson's disease. So I think what Dr. Parkinson was describing was the chronic effects. In addition to man-made chemicals, there are actually naturally occurring pesticides. For example, plants don't like to get eaten by insects. And so 2 of these naturally occurring pesticides, rotenone and permethrins from chrysanthemums, or pyrethroids, pyrethrins, I should say, from chrysanthemums are linked to Parkinson's. And Dr. Parkinson, in his essay, he described 6 people with the condition. The first person he ever describes with the condition, his occupation was that of a gardener. And so I looked, and it turns out the plant that makes rotenone would not be found in England. It's usually in Southeast Asia, but chrysanthemums were popular in 1800 England. So I wonder, just a little guess, is the first person was that because that they were working with chrysanthemums getting exposed to pyrethrins, which in the lab damage dopamine-producing nerve cells. So yes, you're right completely that the toxins vary by time and by space. So in the United States, the rates of Parkinson's are higher in urban areas than in rural areas, suggesting that pesticides may not be the principal explanation for the majority of people with Parkinson's in the US. But in other parts of the world, like sub-Saharan Africa, pesticides might be posing a really big threat because pesticide use in sub-Saharan Africa, for example, has tripled since 1990, and 60% of the population works in agriculture, and the population is young. And the seeds of Parkinson's are in many individuals planted at a young age, sometimes in young adulthood, like the Marines at Camp Lejeune who were 20 years old when they were exposed, sometimes in childhood when people like Brian Grant was a child at Camp Lejeune when his father was stationed there. And I've even heard examples of people from Camp Lejeune, for example, who were conceived at Camp Lejeune and later developed a Parkinson's disease, even though they were never born there.
So can you share the reasoning as to, or your thoughts on the why? Like I have 2 other siblings. I have a brother and a sister, my entire family, I have a large family, and nobody else has Parkinson's, at least not yet. Why me? Why now? And no one else in my family?
So one, we don't know for certain. Two, only a small minority of people exposed to any chemical or any toxin are likely to develop the disease. So for example, not everyone exposed to asbestos is going to get mesothelioma. Only 10% of smokers get lung cancer. Not everyone exposed to a carcinogen is going to develop cancer. Even things that we know to cause cancer don't lead to benzene, for example, isn't going to lead to cancer in everyone. In the book, we highlight 3 explanations for why certain individuals develop the disease and why some don't. One is exposure. So what was the dose you were exposed to? What was the duration of your exposure? What was the route of your exposure? Inhalation to me is very, very concerning because many people, Parkinson's might begin in the nose. And what was the timing of exposure? And I think children, for example, are especially vulnerable. The same amount of chemical exposure to a child is obviously a much bigger deal than to a 6'5" neurologist. So I think we need to pay attention to those. Second are interactions. So some there are genetic interactions. So research done by Dr. Caroline Tanner, Ethan Brown, and their colleagues showed that people who carry a GBA mutations in a gene called GBA, the most common genetic risk factor of disease, might be especially susceptible to the effects of pesticides. We also know that on the gene front that just like you and I differ in the way we break down or metabolize medications, that we might have differences in the way we metabolize or break down pesticides. Some of us might be better at getting rid of them and some of us may not. Then there are interactions with the environment. So if we know that both pesticides and head trauma increase the risk of Parkinson's, but together have amplification of the risk. And then there's likely chance. Some people you might be misfolding this protein called alpha-synuclein in response to the chemicals. And most of the time it's cleared off and your body handles it well, but sometimes it just might get out of control. So that's the interactions. And the third are modifiers. And big modifiers are, for example, aging. So as we age, our ability to clear away misfolded proteins decreases. Sex might be a factor. Women in most studies appear to be at lower risk. Estrogen may be protective, but uncertain. Other diseases might predispose, like diabetes, could exacerbate the thing. So what's the exposure? What are the interactions? And what are the modifiers?
So one of the questions that I've always had, and granted, this is not a study, but just an observation that I've had with people at our gym is there seems to be, I don't want to say high correlation, but is there a correlation? You've mentioned it a couple of times with the same pesticides or toxins that they're also known for people developing cancer. Is there a high relationship between people who are diagnosed with Parkinson's to those then that receive a cancer diagnosis at some point? Because I feel like a lot of people that are at our gym have had cancer diagnoses at the same time that they were diagnosed with Parkinson's. So I don't know if that's just like a fluke or what.
Yeah, so it turned out to be a hard question to answer. And I'll tell you why it's hard. One, the timing between exposure and diagnosis of Parkinson's is 30 plus years, maybe 40 years. So you can imagine doing that kind of study is really hard to do. Some cancers might, and this is a little bit harsh, but might kill somebody before they develop Parkinson's disease. Right. So the association between cancer and Parkinson's might be understated if people at Camp Lejeune, for example, are dying of cancer before they develop Parkinson's disease. That would lead to an undercounting. But there are some cancers that are at higher risk. So skin cancer, so many of you know that risk of melanoma is 2 to 3 times higher in people with Parkinson's. It's unclear why. I kind of get worried that pesticides are contributing to Parkinson's and some pesticides are linked to cancer. And then you add in, farmers getting sun exposure, and that could be a mix. Trichloroethylene, which we spent a lot of time discussing in the book, it's the same chemical that contaminated the marine-based Camp Lejeune, where the Marines had a 70% higher risk of developing Parkinson's disease. That chemical is known to cause cancer. And so among the cancers that are associated with a higher risk are prostate cancer. So we know that people with Parkinson's have a higher risk of prostate cancer. to me, I get really worried when I see prostate cancer and Parkinson's that these individuals get exposed to trichloroethylene. Trichloroethylene, which is in 1970, 2 pounds per American, 2 pounds per American. 1970, 10 million Americans worked with it. And then maybe within the last 10 years, up to 30% of groundwater in the United States are contaminated with trichloroethylene. It also associates liver cancer, kidney cancer, non-Hodgkin's lymphoma, multiple myeloma, and then in small media reports, brain cancer and breast cancer. So if I see, for example, and I had a patient who, I won't give too much details, but he had Parkinson's and breast cancer, male breast cancer. And I was like, how did this happen? And then we went through his history, and he had worked in the textile manufacturing when he was a young man in his early 20s, which was likely using TCE or trichloroethylene.
And it's TCE, is that the one that's used in dry cleaning?
Yeah, so let me show you trichloroethylene. I'm obsessed with trichloroethylene.
I saw you use that before.
Yeah, so trichloroethylene is simple. So your listeners know water is made up of 3 atoms, H2O, 2 hydrogens and oxygen. Trichloroethylene is made up of 6 atoms, 2 carbons in black, 1 hydrogen in white, and 3 chlorines, hence its name trichloroethylene in blue. Its cousin, which is widely used in dry cleaning, is called perchloroethylene or tetrachloroethylene because it has a 4th chlorine atom instead of hydrogen. And so that trichloroethylene was used from 1930s and 1950s in dry cleaning until it was supplanted by perchloroethylene, which is still widely used. California, as first state in the nation to ban perchloroethylene in dry cleaning, but still permissible in 49 other states, to my knowledge. The EPA did ban this and should be phased out over the last 10 years. It looks like that ban is going to hold under the current administration, but we need to make sure that that happens.
So the ban, I just want to ask this question real quick before we get to like the finalizing of like thoughts on the book, but the bans, I think I read in your book, is some of the bans like on paraquat, TCE and other ones, like there was a ban and then that ban was lifted. Is that right?
Yeah, so there was a ban on a pesticide called chlorpyrifos. At one point, over half of apples in the United States had residues of chlorpyrifos on it. In the lab, chlorpyrifos damages dopamine-producing nerve cells, widely sprayed on utility poles, wood poles, golf courses. So the EPA banned, I think, in 2021, and my understanding is that the manufacturer sued, and then the fate of that ban is uncertain, at least to me. The same thing happened even when DDT was banned after Rachel Carson wrote Silent Spring in 1962. Manufacturers sued. I mean, why? So why is the United States still using paraquat? China banned the chemical, the weed killer, to protect its public health. England banned it, but still exports it to Brazil, Mexico, and the United States. Why are we allowing the importation of a pesticide from England, from a country that's made a determination that's unsafe for its population, yet we import it and spray it in increasing amounts, according to the U.S. Geological Survey, on corn, cotton, soybean, and vineyards, being sprayed daily on just about every state in the union. If we hold our regulators, of our representatives accountable for banning it, we can get rid of these chemicals just like we've got rid of lead in paint and lead in gasoline and CFCs and deodorant spray. We can get rid of these weed killers. Paraquat's been around since the 1960s. You know, few of us would drive in a car or fly in an airplane from the 1960s because engineers have safer alternatives. If engineers can come up with safer modes of transportation, chemists can certainly come up with safer weed killers.
It just blows my mind that nobody has done that yet. Like, and why? Like, and I know that's what you're trying to do is like let's stop looking at like how do you not mask the symptoms, but how do you try and like cure it, or like how do we help with the symptoms? It's like let's stop focusing our thoughts and research on that and money there, but how do we prevent it? How do you create something different that we can still get the hopeful potential results that they need from like a farming standpoint or whatever else that's going on. But then we're at least eliminating the factors of us having like negative effects.
And then just one other quick thought there. If you figure out what the cause, everyone wants the cure, right? Everyone with Parkinson's wants a cure. The prerequisite to getting a cure for disease is to determine its cause.
Yeah.
If you want to cure a disease, whether that's hepatitis C, whether that's COVID, whether that's HIV, whether it's peptic ulcer disease, you first must know its cause. It doesn't necessarily mean that if you get the cause, you'll get the cure like HIV. But peptic ulcer disease, hepatitis C, we figured out the cause and we got a cure. You can cure hepatitis C with a pill. If we start identifying the causes like paraquat, like certain dry cleaning chemicals, degreasing chemicals, like air pollution, at least a contributor, we can rapidly identify and screen compounds to see which of these are most effective in terms of treating or possibly curing the disease. In addition, once you know its cause, you can take steps to mitigate your exposure and perhaps slow the rate of progression, which would be wonderful to do. And then finally, I think actually most powerfully is that you can give future generations a world without that disease.
Yeah.
And we have that. We have a world largely free of polio because generations ahead of us raised awareness, raised funds, made their voices heard. 17 years after the March of Dimes was created in 1938 under President Roosevelt, Jonas Salk in Pittsburgh held up a vaccine that prevented people from getting polio. There are no polio treatment centers. The March of Dimes doesn't even fund polio research. There are no polio support groups. There are no polio exercise programs. There's just no polio for the vast majority of the world. We can do exactly the same thing for Parkinson's disease. We have an obligation to receive gifts, and we receive gifts from previous generations, a world largely free of polio. And you have an obligation to reciprocate. And we can reciprocate by giving future generations a world largely free of Parkinson's disease.
Got it. Well, I hate that we're a part of it, but I love that we're a part of it. I mean, obviously for multiple reasons. But Ray, thank you so much. This has been amazing. And again, there's so much more. And I know you're going to take this book from me now, but like, please take a look. There's so much information as to how you can help prevent this disease for yourself. And one of the things as part of your PLAN, the plan, like you have something for each of those letters, is that our goal is to amplify the voices. So we bring patients on here all the time and we share their stories. And I think constantly sharing their stories, one, it helps those that are isolated not feel as isolated that are at home watching and listening so that they can compare themselves to somebody else who's like them. But then hopefully it helps continue just to amplify those voices to say, okay, this isn't just me. This isn't my problem. This isn't something I did or my family did to me. But it's a problem that our environment and ourselves are man-made that we did. So how do we help stop it? That's the action I think that I know that we'll take. So.
And then if you want to amplify your voices, please join the PD Avengers, pdavengers.com. It's free to do so. It takes 30 seconds. There are about 8,000 members. Why aren't there 10,000 members? Or as Michael Oakham would like to say, why aren't there 100,000 members? The organization is founded by people with the disease, people like Brian, people like Jessica, and it's run by them. So pdavengers.com. It takes 30 seconds to join. It's free. If you have questions to me, you can just email us at info@pdplan.org. And Michael and I are coming across the country to unveil the secrets of Parkinson's disease. If you'd like us to come to your community, just go to our website, pdplan.org.
Ray, thank you very much. I so appreciate your time, your willingness to come on and to share this. And thank you so much for all of the work that you did on behalf of everybody for Parkinson's. So thank you for everything that you're doing for us and for future generations out there. But in our last 30 seconds, I will leave you with this. As Ray mentioned, please sign up for PD Avengers. It's very simple, it's easy, it's free, and it will help you help us amplify our voices. We need to amplify our voices, get the right message out so that moving on down the line, we can get this make this a preventable disease like we have in years past with other disease groups. So let's have this, what did you call it?
Let our generation be the last to bear the burden of Parkinson's disease.
Love it. And with that, we'll see you next time. Thank you so much.